My name is Scott Lobdell, and I'm a world-famed comic book writer. Sounds a little egotistical, but it's true. All over the world, people read comics, and I have been fortunate enough to be writing for about 20 years ago last year. So I'm here today to answer your questions. You, right, specifically. Nobody else. Okay, so the first question is, how did you first become involved in comic book writing? I didn't start reading comic books until I was about 17 years old. I was in the hospital, and I had a lung surgery, and people kept bringing me comic books, which I guess is something you do for people when they're in the hospital when you're young. And so because of that, I started reading comic books when I was older, whereas I know a lot of comic book writers, you talk to them, and they've been reading since they were 12 and 13, so they're very immersed in comic books even before they get to an age where they start thinking about what they want to do for a living. So when I was in the hospital, I was reading comic books. I didn't read them so much as what was happening on the page, as much as I was fascinated about the idea that everything that was being written on the page and the words, that they were all being done by somebody, like somebody had to do this for a living. And I remember being fascinated by that. And so I originally went to college for psychology, and I did 2 years, and I realized that everybody in the world had a problem, and I did not want to listen to everybody's problems for the rest of my life. So I thought that would be a really bad attitude for a psychologist. So I decided to pursue writing. And if you look at writing, especially comic book writing, it's all conflict resolution, which is really what psychology is. So I thought, okay, this would be a way that I would be able to talk to people and present, stories with, usually beginning, middle, ends, and conflict and resolution. And that would kind of address whatever need I had to talk to people about things. So, that is when I decided that I wanted to write for a living. And I don't know if the next question kind of bleeds right into this question. So I'm going to go right to the next question, which is, how did you break into the comic book industry? I don't know if I should tell the real story or the fake story. I'll tell the real story. I hardly ever tell the real story, so I'll tell the real story today, since it's you. When I was in college, I did an interview with a college, I worked for the college newspaper, and I was a cartoonist. And I decided that I would use the paper to interview people that I found interesting. And one of the people I interviewed was Chuck Scarborough, who is a local newscaster in New York. And he picked up his own phone and he took the interview, and I was like, oh, wow, that's really cool. So I thought that I don't know anybody in the comic book industry, so if I was going to break into comic books, it would behoove me to know somebody. So I called up this editor. His name is Al Milgram, and he answered the phone, and I wanted to do an interview with him. So I went down, I did the interview, and I printed it in the college newspaper. And then that was my in. So what I did was I lived in Poughkeepsie, New York, which was about 2 hours outside of New York, and I would go to I live across. This is very boring. I lived in Marlborough, which was across this bridge from Poughkeepsie. But I'd go to Poughkeepsie, take a 2-hour train ride down, and walk 30 blocks to the comic book, to Marvel Comics, and I'd hand them a single sheet of paper, which would be a synopsis, and I'd be like, yeah, I was just in town, doing another interview, and I thought I'd drop this off. And so they're like, oh, yeah, come on. So I did this for about a year and a half. Every 2 or 3 months, or a year and a half, I'd go down, and I just happened to drop by, and so Al would come out at first, and then he'd send his assistant out, and then eventually his assistant got hired to be an editor, and so then I had her assistant and Al's new assistant that I could bring stories to, and then eventually that assistant, Ann Nocenti, became an editor, so then I had 3 different assistants. So I started networking just as the guy that would come in and hand them a piece of paper, and I'd say maybe out of the 30 stories I turned in, maybe 6 of them got responses. So so that's how I started to build up. And for the longest time, I'd say about 3 years, I was that guy who was always giving them stories, and pretty soon people couldn't remember like how I first started to come to DC. To Marvel. I was just that guy who was bringing stories around, and it was a long time. I mean, when you think about a 2-hour trip, it was like 5 hours of travel just to walk in and hand somebody a piece of paper. But I knew that that's what I had to do. This was before email and before everything, so I would do that, and eventually I started getting rejection letters. I got tons and tons and tons of rejection letters, to the point where I was actually decorating my wall of my bedroom in rejection letters. And I'll never forget, I got a letter from Tom DeFalco, who was this was before he became editor-in-chief of Marvel. And the letter said, it was a form letter saying, thank you very much, blah, blah, blah. And he'd written a P.S. And he said, P.S., this story isn't as bad as the last story. So I showed everybody I knew this letter. I was so excited. And my brother was the only one who took me aside and said, it's a rejection letter. And it says, this story is not as bad as the last one. Why are you showing everybody? I said, because he wrote back. Like it was bad. It's not bad enough. It was enough that I got form letters, but Tom had taken the time to write, he read it and he wrote that this was not as bad as the last one. So it was a huge opening for me, and I took it as the inspirational quote that it was. Flash forward ahead a few years, there's a new comic book opening up called Marvel Comics Presents, and they did 8-page stories for characters who they did 8-page stories every 2 weeks. So what that meant is that the editor, instead of being in charge of a book with 22 pages with one writing team run art team, he was responsible for a book that came out every 2 weeks that had 4 art teams with 4 characters and 4 artists and 4 letters and 4 colors, and he had to get all his stories that he used with characters like Daredevil and Wolverine, he had to get them approved by 4 different editors. So it was a brutal undertaking, and I was watching it going, well, if he could get characters that only he was responsible for, that he didn't have to ask anybody permission for, then I could ingratiate myself to him by writing stories for those characters. So I went to him with something called the Global Village series, and I said, remember Conscious of the Champions that had like those, 30 different characters from all over the world? It had like Shamrock from Ireland, and the American Eagle, who was this American Indian character, and it had the Arabian Knight from Arabia, I guess, and it had all these characters. And of course he said, no, I have no idea, because no one knew these characters or cared about those characters at all. But when I made the pitch that he didn't have to deal with any other editors, he jumped on it. So I sold him my first 3 8-page stories, and he was so thrilled that he didn't have to get them approved that about 3 weeks later, I had gone from 0 stories to 3 stories to 54 stories that I'd sold. And suddenly I was in. So that's how I broke in. And it's a long story, but edit it at your own risk. Which of the new DC titles have you worked on? I am doing 3 titles currently. I am writing Teen Titans, which stars the younger teenage superheroes as a team who are coming together in the first issue of the series. I'm doing another one of those characters. You have Red Robin, Kid Flash, Wonder Girl, Superboy, The Wall, Bug, who's a character, and also a character we're calling Charcoal Girl for now, because it's a surprise and we don't want to ruin it. Even for you, I will not ruin this surprise. And one of those characters, as I mentioned, was Superboy. So Superboy has his own title. And then I'm also working on a character called Red Hood and the Outlaws, which is Red Hood is a former Robin who was brutally beaten to death by the Joker. And we all know how, that can be very frustrating if you're beaten to death by anyone, really, but certainly the Joker. And so he's come back to life, and he's been around, I guess, for about 5 years, and he's been quite the... he's been very angry with a lot of people, and he's been very angry with Batman because Batman didn't kill the Joker out of revenge for Jason being killed. And there's been a lot of angst around the character for the last 5 years, and so I am actually going off in a different direction. I'm kind of using his friendship with another character called Roy Harper to kind of create this Butch Cassidy and Sundance feel to these two guys. And what it is that, we know, Jason was a former Robin who was killed and came back as Red Hood. Roy is a former sidekick who lost his sidekick privileges to Green Arrow when he became a drug addict. And so these two former sidekicks look at each other, and even though they're both a complete mess, their feeling is they both have the same responses, which is, thank God I'm not you. And so this is what happens when you take two supremely screwed up former teen sidekicks and kind of mush them together and see how they make their way in life. So that is those 3 books that I'm working on for DC. How do I feel about the numerous iterations of the Generation X characters have gone through since the series ended? How do I feel about the numerous iterations that Generation X characters? I'll have to be honest. I didn't read the book after I left. So while I created it and I stayed on the series till issue 25, I really never looked back. So I've looked back at the X-Men series and Uncanny X-Men, but I never really have followed Generation X since then. So I can't really say. But the other thing too is that as somebody I've been writing comics for 20 years now, which means that I have come on to many books that have existed for many, many, many issues before me and continued to exist many, many issues after me. So the thing is that you really can't, all you can really do when you create characters or write existing comic book characters is you can only tell the story that you are telling. And then, somebody else is going to come along and kill your character or bring back to life somebody that you've killed for whatever reason. Characters will get married, characters will change, characters will retire. So you can't really spend too much time thinking about it. So I don't really know. I know M is in X Factor, and but other than that, I don't really. I wish I had a more interesting answer, but. What do you see as the future of comic books? I don't know. It's kind of interesting. I was. I'll tell you about the past of comic books for a second. In the old days, you would take a comic book and you'd read it and you'd roll it up and you'd put it in your pocket and you'd go to the doctor's and you'd be waiting for the doctor and take it out and you read it again and maybe you read the letter column this time or you read a few of the ads or something. But when I started reading comic books, that's what we did. We would read the comic books and we'd throw them away, or we'd roll them up, or maybe you'd save them somewhere. Some people saved them, but the thing is that now, it seems to me that a tremendous amount of people will either read the comic or just buy the comic and put it in plastic, or they, I've been reading, people have other comic book people have stopped me and said, why is that rolled up in your pocket? It's because it's a piece of paper, with pictures on it. And so I think that, I don't know, I know there's a lot of digital, there's not a lot of talk, there's a lot of talk of this digital media thing happening. You heard it here first. No, there's a lot of digital comic book stuff that's getting into people's hands, but I don't think it's going to spell the end of the printed, they call them floppies now, the printed monthly comic book. But I will tell you something interesting, since it is my interview. I can tell you something that I think is interesting. When I was around when you used to watch movies on TV, the 4:30 movie, and it was first you go to the movie theater, and if it wasn't, you'd have to see it while it was playing. If it wasn't playing, you couldn't see it again for a few years until it showed up on TV, and then it would show up once a year, and then it'd show up again 2 years later, and then maybe it'd show up on the 4:30 movie. But that was the only way you could see a movie, and then eventually cable started. You know, HBO started, and people were like, well, geez, if people are going to be able to watch movies on TV all the time, they're not going to go to the theaters. So, and they predicted then that this was going to be the death of movies, at least the death of seeing movies in theaters. But what it did was it created another venue for people to see the movies. So that meant there was more money going into the creation of the movies, which allowed the people who were making movies to make movies that weren't necessarily seen by a lot of people in the theaters, but then could have a second life in cable. The same thing happened in video, when suddenly people were like, you know, when you could go to the store and get the video whenever you wanted to, then you didn't have to subscribe to you know, a cable channel that had like 10 crappy movies that you didn't want to see. Can I say crappy? Sorry. 10 crappy movies that you didn't want to see. Instead, you were watching, you know, you can go to the movie and get whatever one you want. And suddenly that was going to be the death of, you know, HBO, and eventually the death of theaters. Because really, if you could just go and get a movie anytime you want and put it in your TV, then that was going to be the be-all and end-all. What we discovered over the years is, whether it's, you know, cable or video or DVDs, or now with streaming, is that all you're really doing is each time you're creating another venue for people to see your product. And at least that's the way it is in, you know, movies, and, you know, even when we see TV shows, you know, yeah, there's less advertising dollars that goes into the broadcasting, but by letting people see TV shows whenever they want, with advertising, it gets the, you know, shows in front of even more people's eyes than see it on the broadcasting network. So I think similarly that while we are creating digital comic books for people to be able to read on iPads and whatnot, it's going to keep the whole concept of storytelling and serialized storytelling and graphic storytelling alive, so that it will only, I think, will not hasten the end of the monthly comic book, but instead keep the idea of the monthly comic book alive for longer than maybe it would have if people stopped going to comic book stores, so, which a lot of people have. Are there any comic book adaptations that you've enjoyed, says Professor Xavier from Westchester? Actually, yes, that works out perfectly, Charles, because my favorite movie was the most recent one, which was X-Men First Class. I thought it was great. It was sweeping. It was epic. It was. I was impressed by the fact that each character really got their own moment. A lot of times in these big ensemble movies, you don't get that. It was interesting to me because it felt like, even though it was an origin story, I'm sick of origin stories in movies. It's like, you know, I would rather just see it happen. And maybe now that all the origin movies have been told, maybe we'll see more of that. But this was a great origin story. I thought everybody did a great job with it. So, do you think film is a good medium for comics? I'd have to say sometimes yes and sometimes no. I think that, you know, it used to be when we were doing comic books, and this wasn't that long ago, but it used to be that we would say that in comic books you can see something that you could never see anywhere else, because, you know, we could have Spider-Man swinging through the streets of Manhattan, and you could have Galactus, you know, stepping onto the Earth and, you know, trying to eat it with show up with his knife and fork, and this was stuff that you couldn't see anywhere else because the special effects weren't around for it. Now I just saw the recent Spider-Man movie, and there's a 5-minute clip where it's all I don't know, from his perspective, where you're actually leaping and running and diving and swinging. I know there's a word for that, some game player word, but I don't know what it is. So now it's different. Now there's stuff that you can see on the screen that you can't see. You can't really get the same effect watching it on a comic book. So I think there's probably going to be, like I say, some movies are going to be a great avenue for that, and some movies are not. But ultimately, yeah, I think film is probably a good medium, especially if they're out there spending money on the product. So, if you could make up a superhero right now off the top of your head, what would their power, name, and outfit colors be? I'm not usually involved in the actual coloring of the outfits. If I could invent a character right now, it would be a character who has the power to look through a TV screen and make people do whatever the person on the screen does, or makes them do whatever he wants them to do. And his power would be really annoying voyeur man, really annoying voyeur man. And he wouldn't be wearing anything because he would be so turned on by being able to control even the simplest. See, look, this is in 3D now. We're in 3D now. You can't tell, but that's what I would do. So I'm glad. See, I kept it a guy. I don't know why I did that. I should have been. Okay. Voyeur guy. Okay. Other than comics, what are your passions in life? I don't know if this is a trick answer or not, but my passion in life is probably writing. I haven't been on vacation in a long time, but when I did go on vacation, I would always bring my laptop and my notepad, and I was always writing, and people would say, "Hey, it's your vacation, you have to relax." And I'm like, "This is how I relax." I don't think I did it in that voice, but that's how I relax. And so yeah, even late at night, if I'm, whether it's a comic book that I'm working, I usually don't work late at night, and I'll tell you why in a second, even though it's not on here. You get an extra bonus answer. Even if I'm late at night or something, I'll be sitting there with a notepad and just kind of like jotting notes down, and usually I'll start writing bigger and bigger as I pass out. I'm like, so that's what I do to relax, and I love it. So even though it's not comic books, it is writing. So I don't like to write. I don't like to do all-nighters, and I am annoyed when I hear about writers. Other comic book writers will tell me, they're like, "I've been up for 2 days. I've been writing. I've been up for 2 days. I've been up for 3 days." And I'm like, okay, so you're telling me that you're completely exhausted. You're sitting there passing out, and you're like, this is your attempt to turn in your best work. Like, I don't know. It just seems like it's not a good. It's not a good thing. I think that you need to be well rested and clear of mind, and so that's what I think. So my advice to you is, if you're writing, people have day jobs and people work, but if you're working to the point of exhaustion, I can't imagine any job where that's where you're doing your best work. So get some sleep and eat your vegetables. Batman or Superman, Batgirl or Robin, X-Men or Ninja Turtles. Let's take them one at a time. Batman or Superman? I'd have to say Superman. I find Superman to be more. Batman is a little obsessed, and Superman might be obsessed with doing the right thing. But I'd have to say Superman. Superman is the light at the end of the tunnel, and Batman is the tunnel. So I prefer Superman. Batgirl or Robin? If it's a dating question, Batgirl. if it's a writing question, I would say Batgirl too, because I would be intrigued, because I'm already writing a few Robins right now. So, and also I'm very intrigued by, at least Robin started out as a sidekick and worked his way up. Batgirl really kind of just showed up one day and was like, I'm Batgirl and I'm going to be, aside from like whatever copyright infringement there would have been on Batman's part, he kind of just was like, okay, you want to be Batgirl? Fine, be Batgirl. I always found that kind of interesting. X-Men or Ninja Turtles? I'm gonna have to go with X-Men. I think that there's about 60 of them now or something, and there's only 4 Ninja Turtles. And in fact, I'll tell you another funny story. Is Ninja Turtles is there's only 4 of them, and what was always made me laugh is that after they did the initial 4 toys, they started doing like action Leonardo, and then telephone Leonardo. It's like you pull the string and he'd whisper. I made that up, but one that I didn't make up was pizza delivery Michelangelo. And I was like, okay, they're kind of like scratching at them. So at least with the X-Men, you can keep creating these characters and they keep going on and on and on. And I'll just tell you, it's a funny story is Joe Matt and I we were creating characters in the 90s that they were turning into toys almost as quickly as we would, on a conversation, I don't know if they were bugging the phone or what, but as soon as we would talk about introducing these characters, they would show up as toys. And so as a joke, I said, let's come up with like the worst characters that they would never ever possibly create as toys. And they were interesting characters, but it was called Spat and Grovel. Spat being the past tense of the word spit, and grovel, which is groveling. So the idea is that she was a 25-year-old woman who was de-aged to the point of she was getting younger and younger and younger. So by the time we finally saw her, she was an 8-year-old in a fur bikini who refused to dress other than she would normally dress. And her giant 6-foot-tall iguana that she would ride around in. And we thought for sure that we'd come up with the two characters they could possibly never turn into toys. And for all you people at home who have your Spat and Grovel toys on yourself, because they actually did, you can attest to the fact that they did make Spat and Grovel toys. And so if you need a little 8-year-old in a fur bikini and a giant iguana, look them up. They're probably on eBay somewhere. Why do heroes need their super identity? Why do superheroes need their secret identity, rather? Why do superheroes need to hide their super identity? Well, I'll give you a perfect example. Today, I was driving here today, and I came to a light right here on Lincoln and the freeway. And some guy leans out the window and he's like, "Oh my God, you're Scott Lobdell, right? The comic book writer?" I said, "Yes." And he's like, "Will you sign this for me?" And I'm like, "Well, I can't." And I started to drive away. And he was like, "No, you have to sign this." So he got out of his car and he started chasing my car down the street, begging for me to sign this comic book. Now, that didn't really happen. But it could happen if I did not fiercely protect my own identity. So, because when I'm out driving around, I'm actually known as Bert. And, no. Okay, so that's a bad example. But the point is that if, you look at celebrities, and, I think it was Michael J. Fox said that Michael J. Fox was famous at the exact same time that Michael Jackson was famous. And Michael Jackson was surrounded by, an entourage of 30 people, like the lion tamer, and it's just everywhere he would go was a big zoo. And Michael J. Fox would go to the supermarket and just buy milk and eggs and go home. And he was always asked how he could get away with it. And he said because it's just the way he carried himself. So I think that there are probably superheroes that could fit in fine with society. And there are other superheroes who, if you put away the Red Skull and then you go out on a date and the Red Skull breaks out of jail, chances are, if the Red Skull knows who you are, he's going to, at the very least, interrupt your date, and at the very worst, probably kill your date and her family and your friends and your dog and your dog's friends, that wherever your dog hangs out, whatever dog park your dog goes to, Red Skull will come there and kill all those dogs, and you don't want that to happen. So, unless the dog, sometimes these dog places can charge a lot, so you might say, this is the perfect opportunity to check that off my budget. No more doggy daycare. How do you feel about viewing comic books on devices like the iPad? Is it a completely different experience from physical paper comics? I am embarrassed to say here in public that I have not viewed any comic books on iPads or even cell phones. So, yeah, there is something to be said for holding it in your hands. I mean, I think it's, it'd kind of be like, do you want to eat pizza or do you want to watch pizza on the iPad? No one would ask that question. So why did you ask that question, whoever you are? What is my opinion about the decompressed storytelling trend? I think it's crap. No, I do. I kind of think it's crappy. I was always taught that a comic book story should, or most stories should have a beginning, middle, and end. And, while there are elements of a continuing series that, you have a cliffhanger or something, or you have subplots that weave in, but the issue itself should be its own creature or product or whatever you want to call it. To me, it'd be kind of like if I went to a comedy club and a comedian said, knock, knock. And I said, who's there? And he said, come back next week and I'll tell you who's there. And I would come back next week and he would say, Amos. And I would say, Amos who? And he'd go, come back next week, you'll get the rest of your joke. And you're like, who would do that? And so, to me, that's what decompressed storytelling is. It's like, if you're not getting a story for the $2.99 or $3.99 or whatever it is, then you aren't getting what you paid for. And so, yeah, it's great to collect them all in a trade paperback and have, a huge story told over the pace of 6 issues, but that shouldn't change the fact that each individual story should be its own thing. So I think they should stop. If there are other writers out there watching this interview, I would tell you to stop, or I'm going to be angry. Okay, I'm over it. When Starfire is paired with less powerful people than her, she gets knocked out or faints in every issue. That is true. Do you have a better way to deal with the power dynamics of the Outlaws moving forward? Yeah, I think what's really fun is you get Jason, who basically is a guy with guns, and you have Roy, who's a guy who uses, bow and arrow, and some trick arrows, certainly, and then you have this walking nuclear reactor who hangs out with them, and rather than kind of push her out of that equation, instead, I'm playing with the fact that what happens when, you're outnumbered, 300 to 1, and you have a pair of guns and you have a bow and arrow. I mean, who else are you going to call but the nuclear reactor, the hot, gorgeous, orange-skinned, green-eyed, flame-haired nuclear reactor that you hang out with all the time. So rather than playing her down, we're just playing her up. Or otherwise, why is she hanging out with them if she's not going to be useful to them, like from her own point of view and from their point of view. So yeah, I do have to say that sometimes, a lot of times, like I'll look at characters and, I might notice the same thing. I'm like, well, okay, if she's there, why do you keep scaling her down instead of scaling her up, or playing to who she is. So I think that's it's a good observation, but it's also like, I'll give you an example. There's a character, Kid Flash in Teen Titans, and there is an issue that I had read where Kid Flash is watching a video. He's watching a classic movie, and he turns to his friends and he says, "You got to watch this movie. It's a classic." And I remember reading it, and I'm thinking, well, I don't know. I mean, the Kid Flash's mind races at like probably 300,000 miles a second, give or take. I would imagine that as a person, the very, very last thing he would do is A, watch a video, and B, watch a movie that he's already seen. Because to you and I, you know, it would be like somebody talking like this for 3 hours, which would be really boring. And I'll answer my next question in that voice too, so just to prove my point. But to me, if you have a character and his mind races that quickly, if he's going to watch a movie, he's going to go to the multiplex where they're showing 16 movies, and he's going to be watching all 16 movies at once, running back and forth to the theater, trying to time it in a way that he's not actually watching the frames between the movies. And to me, that is what a guy who has super speed is going to, you know, how he's going to entertain himself. So the thing is that, like, that's how I tend to look at characters, you know, rather than just say, okay, they're fast, or okay, this girl's a nuclear reactor. How does that, you know, how is that character going to be existing in as close to real life as it can be? So I don't know. So I thought that was interesting. Maybe it's not interesting, but it's interesting to me. In the new DC 52, are Starfire and Nightwing going to have any positive interactions from here on out in the new DCU? Even when they weren't a couple, they were friends and teammates. Will that camaraderie disappear? There's a few answers to that question. I've only plotted the first 8 issues. I know that in that time, I'm trying not to go back to the same well that all these characters have existed in before. Like Red Hood, for example, has no interest in being in Gotham City. He thinks it's a cesspool, and you know, he's been there, he's done it, and he's moved on. Roy isn't going to be relapsing. We've seen that happen a dozen times since his first bout. So I don't have any interest in telling that story again. Similarly, I never like it when characters are defined, especially women characters tend to be defined by the men in their lives. At one point I took over Uncanny X-Men, and one of the first things I did was to remove Forge, because Storm and Forge were defined so closely with each other. Similarly, I'd like to spend the first year of Red Hood dealing with Starfire as the woman that she is, and not the woman that she was in regards to Nightwing. I'll say it's this: as somebody that was married for 8 years and divorced, I don't really talk to my ex-wife unless it's a birthday, or, you know, our dog is sick or something. And I think what happens is you can have intense relationships with people, and then you move on, and you don't, you know, sometimes you see them, sometimes you don't. And, you know, I think what happens in a monthly comic book is, you know, you have the 22 pages, and so readers want particular things to happen, and so there's this need to see Starfire and Robin or Nightwing together again, and I don't feel that need to see them together again anytime soon. And so to get back to the original question, I don't really know what the relationship is currently, and I don't know how they're going to react when they see each other again. But chances are they will. I just don't know when. And so I hope that answers your question. Why does Arsenal no longer have a daughter? Roy, I actually never call him Arsenal in the... I never call him Arsenal, and I never call him Speedy, and I never call him Red Arrow. I just call him Roy, because my feeling is he's kind of moved on from that. He doesn't have a daughter, partially because he's much younger than he's been portrayed in the past. He's about 19 years old now. And other than, MTV, which glorifies teen pregnancy a lot. Hey, kids. I just didn't think it was... I think the notion of Roy either leaving his daughter at home to fight crime or taking his daughter with him to fight crime, either way, I just felt it was, I just think the character is better off not having a daughter. And but I know people got very, very, very attached to her when she was around, so I feel badly for them, but I don't feel badly for Roy. I think it was the right decision. If the Red Hood, a.k.a. Jason Todd, you never say a.k.a. in real life. Did you notice that? It's always in comic books. I've never said, hi, Scott Lobdell, a.k.a. comic book writer. No one has ever said a.k.a. in real life. Except for WB. There's a bunch of WB shows where they'll go, hey, a.k.a. yeah. But they use it properly. Okay. If the Red Hood, a.k.a. Jason Todd, wants nothing to do with Gotham and the Bat family, why does he have a red bat on his chest? I think he's being ironic. I didn't even notice there was a red bat. How this is awkward. No, he's being ironic. I'm just teasing. Does the Twitter conversation you had with Ron Mars have anything to do with why your social media presence has declined? I'd partially say yes and no. Like most good questions, they are answered with a yes and a no. I left Facebook because I just felt it was too intrusive. Like I just felt like I was living in public and I didn't enjoy it. I had 5,000 friends, which I know is silly because what I probably should have done when I started was to differentiate friends and family and fans. But when I started, I remembered what it was like to be a fan of someone and to have that connection. I thought would be really fun, and so I didn't want to be in a position where I was ever saying no to anyone. So consequently, every day I would go in the mailbox. There was dozens and dozens and dozens of requests to be my friend, and so I just felt that there was something. I just felt I needed a distance between who I was and who I was professionally, and I'm not really good at being anything other than just me, so my personalness was bleeding into my professionalness, and I think it was just causing some problems. So, because the thing too is that you read a comic book or something, you read a book or whatever. I mean, how many times have you read a book and you're fascinated by, or how many times have you seen an actor and you think, oh my God, that actor's really good. I love this actor on the show. It's my favorite show. And then you see an interview with them and you realize that they are nothing like you wanted them to be. And for whatever reason, and then that kind of impacts on your enjoyment of the work. And because I guess I just prefer a distance between whatever I think about life and the world and everything to be separate from my work. And so I think things like Facebook and Twitter were making that difficult for people. And for me, I guess, I don't know. As far as that particular conversation, I actually Google it. This new thing, Google. Have you heard about it? You Google this whole thing, you'll see. We did a long interview about it. But what I'll tell you is that there's a big blow up. We smoothed it over. We talked it through. Again, something that would have been like, a 5-minute conversation between Ron and I in real life took on this whole thing, people taking sides and arguing and, stuff. So, but what happened was it was about 3 days later, and I was on at, like 6 in the morning, and so I was like, I'll just write to some people, blah, blah. And I wound up, sending out like 30 Twitters and, half an hour because I was writing to all those people. And I got a text from my editor at DC that said, get off of Twitter, it's the devil's playground, and you're late. And so I was like, oh, okay, good point. So it was, if you're going to be late on a script or a story, make sure you're not on Twitter, because then they know that you're not doing your work. So, yeah. And as far as social media presence, I'm glad I'm doing this interview. I was glad I was asked. I'm glad I can promote the books. But as far as like a social media presence, I don't think. I don't know. I see a lot of comic book writers who have a ton of followers on Twitter, but it doesn't seem to manifest itself in sales. So I'm not sure, like, other than the adulation of fans, I'm not really sure what the purpose is. So, and I don't need adulation because I have you. What is your favorite comic universe and character? Ooh, I don't have a favorite comic universe. Having played in several of them, each has its own appeal. Certainly I spent my longest time at Marvel. And I do have to say, my favorite character has got to be Professor X, always, because here was a guy who started this movement around him just because he believed that he could make the world a better place. And, Spider-Man does his part and Captain America does his part. And, but Captain America was named after something bigger than himself. Whereas Professor X was a guy who, even at great personal disadvantage to himself, opened up his home to a bunch of people and his heart to this idea that the world can be made better, not just for his people, but for all the people around him, around them, and their interactions with each other, which is a truly noble and much more larger thing than you would expect from a comic book character. So Professor X is certainly my favorite. I will also say that the DC New is really fun because we're getting a lot of leeway to tell stories that we would not have gotten if I had just taken over Teen Titans with issue 101. There would have been, because the world the way it existed several months ago, I would have been limited in the type of stories that I would be able to tell with those characters. Whereas now the sky is essentially the limit. Eventually, too, at the limit. So once you get to there, it'll be the limit. And so that's that. Why did you leave Generation X at 28, and how well did the series go until its 2001 cancellation at 75, in your opinion? Well, the first part of the question is that I didn't want to be one of these writers that had to be pried away from their keyboard, being told that it was time to move on to another property. I've seen it happen many times in the past where you get to know the characters so well that you don't want them to grow because you want them to stay, it's like raising kids. You want them to be those cute little things. And so I just felt that, I laid a foundation, and I was actually at the time looking forward to seeing what other people would do with the characters. I didn't follow the characters after that, so I can't really say. I would, I would be in a comic book store and I'd see, someone decided to kill Sync, which I thought was unfortunate because he was a great character. But I do know, and I can speak to this without anything in particular, is I know at one point they flash forwarded a year or 2 years or 6 months or something, which I always think is a bad idea in comic books because people follow comic books from month to month, and then suddenly you flash ahead a year or 6 months. And to me, what you're saying to the reader is, wow, you just missed 6 months of really awesome stories. And so rather than rejuvenating the franchise towards the end, I think they just kind of alienated readers. So I would, maybe someday, when I'm retired, I'll get all the trade paperbacks and I'll read them and have a heart attack on a beach somewhere or an aneurysm. But until then, I'm sorry to say that, again, like I say, I didn't really follow them. So, did you pitch to be involved in the new DC 52, or did DC seek you out? Last Christmas, I was asked to lunch by the editor-in-chief and the publisher, who were both people I'd worked with in the past, and they asked me if I wanted to work at DC. And so I said, yeah, that'd be great. And then I didn't hear from them for 4 or 5 months. And every once in a while I'd check in and I'd say, so did you want me to you said you wanted me to work on Teen Titans. Do you want me to do that? And they're like, well, not just yet. And then finally at the end of those 4 months, I was pulled aside and said the reason why I wasn't working on the Teen Titans in that time was because they were making plans to relaunch the series from #1. So they didn't want me thinking about what I would do with those characters until that time. So I guess it's kind of I was asked to work at DC, and then ultimately I didn't realize, but I was being brought in for a very specific reason, which was the DC 52. So, okay, well, that was really fun, and I didn't even finish my water because that's how exciting it has all been. So I'll tell you that I had a great time. Thank you for writing in all your questions, and I got to most of them, but there was a bomb scare in the building, so we had to leave. No, I just made that up, but I'm a comic book writer. That's what I do. So I would ask you, when you get the chance, to pick up your copies of Teen Titans #1, which comes out on September 28th, and Superboy, which comes out next week, or Wednesday, if you're watching this today. And then Red Hood and the Outlaws, which comes out, I think, September 21st at a comic book store near you. Thank you very much, and I salute you.